If you saw this sign at a political rally, you'd probably be deeply confused. If you live in the United States, you may recognize it as the 2016 election slogan of President Trump, but with a slight twist. It's been appropriated and reused by a candidate in the 2020 Democratic primaries, Senator Elizabeth Warren. While this would probably not be a good strategy for Senator Warren in the 21st century United States, this kind of political appropriation wasn't really an issue in ancient Mesopotamia. Join me to find out about the political life of the Babylonian creation epic, Enuma Elish. Like, subscribe, come along for the ride. The Enuma Elish is one of the more famous myths from Mesopotamia. Exactly when it was written is something that's debated, but the most recent scholarship suggests that it dates to the Kassite period. That is, sometime in the late 2nd millennium BCE. In it, the city god of Babylon, Marduk, defeats the primordial sea monster Tiamat and is crowned king of the gods by his fellow deities. While it's often referred to as the Babylonian creation myth, I use that description myself, it's not really a good way to think about the text. While it does open with the creation of the world, when we consider the poem as a whole, it's clear that it was composed to explain and justify the elevation of the Babylonian city god Marduk to the head of the Mesopotamian pantheon. As with any other text, Enuma Elish wasn't composed in a vacuum, and if you've watched the other two videos in this series, you'll be unsurprised to hear that the text borrows heavily from other literary traditions. The motivations behind this intertextuality are almost entirely political, and in contrast to the Gilgamesh epic, Enuma Elish draws from a story about a completely different god, the text Anzu, which recounts the deeds of Ninurta, a warrior deity and son of Enlil. In this video, we're going to look first at exactly how Enuma Elish uses the Anzu myth to elevate Marduk's position in the divine hierarchy. We'll consider structural similarities between the two poems, and some specific examples that illustrate the close connection between the two. Then we'll take a look at the why. I've already mentioned that this was a politically motivated act, but how can ancient mythology be an agent for political change? Before we can compare the two texts, it might be helpful to briefly summarize them. In the Anzu myth, the Anzu bird, a lion-headed eagle, steals the Tablet of Destinies from the god Enlil while he takes a bath. This is a huge problem, as the Tablet of Destinies contains great power and apparently allows the person who possesses it to alter reality as they see fit. 3 different gods are then called upon to try and retrieve the tablet and defeat Anzu, but all 3 refuse. Finally, the god Ninurta agrees to take up the challenge. On his first attempt he is defeated, but after receiving some helpful advice from the god Ea, he overcomes Anzu and takes back the tablet. The poem ends with a recitation of the names of the different gods which are associated with Ninurta. In Enuma Elish, the sea goddess and ancestress of the gods, Tiamat, creates an army of monsters to kill the gods in revenge for the murder of her spouse, Apsu. 2 gods are then asked to deal with this threat, and, as in the Anzu myth, both of them refuse. Finally, Marduk is asked to save the rest of the gods. He agrees, on the condition that he is made ruler of the gods. He heads out to do battle, and defeats Tiamat in single combat. Using the body of his defeated enemy, he creates the world and his home Babylon. The poem then ends with the gods reciting the 50 names of Marduk. Even with those incredibly brief summaries, you can probably already see that the structure of the 2 poems is largely the same. The fact that Marduk takes Ninurta's place as the hero of the story is a relatively small part of the process of his elevation, and he is, in fact, shown to go above and beyond his predecessor's achievements at several points of the narrative. Before we dive into specifics, Wisdom and Machinist have both argued that the very structure of Enuma Elish is designed to show Marduk's superiority to Ninurta, so let's take a look at that structure. Both myths open with order in the world, which is then disrupted by a chaotic element that poses a threat to the gods and their very existence. The gods then react to this threat, seeking a hero who will agree to take on the challenge of defeating them. The battle follows, in which the hero is ultimately successful and order is restored. So far, so good, but this doesn't exactly show Marduk as a better god than Ninurta. That really comes into play when we consider the structural difference between the two. Enuma Elish opens with the creation of the world, describing how there were two primordial waters that mingled together to create the first generations of gods. Anzu, on the other hand, opens in a world that is already formed, with an established divine society. As Wisdom says, Enuma Elish begins in a time even before the Ninurta mythology could take place, and before Enlil was made chief god. Marduk is shown to be supreme simply by virtue of doing everything Ninurta does before Ninurta is able to do it. Machinist also points out that, while Ninurta restores a pre-existing social order by defeating Anzu, Marduk brings that order into existence by creating the world from the body of his defeated enemy. In addition, Ninurta restores an order that is ruled over by his father, Enlil, while Marduk creates an order in which he is at the top of the hierarchy. In the cosmos, according to Enuma Elish, not only is Marduk made the supreme ruler, but he is elevated to that position before any other deity has a chance to hold it. He is both surpassing Ninurta's role in the Anzu myth and supplanting Enlil as chief deity. Looking at specific points of connection between the two poems, there are several passages or events in Anzu that Enuma Elish adapts to suit its own goals. The one that you may have noticed from my brief summaries is the motif of gods being asked to fight Anzu or Tiamat and refusing. In the Anzu myth, the gods appeal to Adad, Gira and Shara. All three refuse, on the grounds that because Anzu has stolen the Tablet of Destinies, he is impossible to defeat. Finally, Ninurta agrees to step in. In Enuma Elish, only two deities are asked, Ea and Anu. Both of them set out to fight Tiamat, but turn back in terror when they see their enemy. Marduk is the third and final god asked to fight her. By only having two gods turn away from Tiamat, instead of the expected three, Wisdom argues that this speeds up Marduk's victory, and makes it seem effortless in comparison to Ninurta's, but still emphasises that Tiamat is so powerful that only Marduk can defeat her. The gods chosen to precede Marduk are also notable in that they are two of the triad of supreme Mesopotamian deities. The third god who we may expect to see alongside Ea and Anu is Enlil, Ninurta's father, and the head deity that Marduk supplants in Enuma Elish. Marduk's success in defeating Tiamat after Ea and Anu have both already failed securely solidifies his role as the new Enlil, head of the Supreme Triad. The combat between Marduk and Tiamat also shows connections to the battle between Ninurta and Anzu, but again it is the differences that show Marduk's superiority. In the Anzu myth, Ninurta's first attack is repelled by Anzu, who uses the Tablet of Destinies to turn back the arrows shot at him. Ninurta has to lay low while receiving advice from Ea on how he should best defeat Anzu. Marduk, on the other hand, defeats Tiamat on his first attempt in single combat. His success is attributed to no one but himself, definitely an improvement upon Ninurta. The battle scene in Enuma Elish also calls to mind another aspect of Ninurta's mythology that was not found in the Anzu myth. As a warrior hero deity, Ninurta is known to have slain 11 different monsters. In Enuma Elish, after the defeat of Tiamat, Marduk turns his attention to her second-in-command, Kingu, and a collection of 11 monsters that Tiamat created. Even though those 11 are not mentioned in the Anzu myth, they still appear to have been a well-known part of Ninurta's mythology, and by incorporating the defeat of 11 monsters by Marduk into Enuma Elish, the author continued to recast Marduk in Ninurta's role. The next specific example of borrowing comes after the defeat of both Anzu and Tiamat. Ninurta cuts some of Anzu's feathers and lets the wind carry them to the rest of the gods, so that they know he has been successful. Marduk does the same, only with Tiamat's blood, as she has no wings. In one of the original comparisons of the two poems, Lambert argued that this was evidence of a clumsy adaptation of the Anzu myth. It makes little sense for blood to be carried by the wind, but feathers floating on a breeze is a much more realistic image. Wisdom, in her 2014 thesis, argues instead that the supernatural realm does not need conform to our understanding of physics, and as Marduk is a storm god who controls the wind, it's not surprising that he's able to make blood droplets fly like feathers might. Finally, we come to the 50 names of Marduk. This is a litany of different names and titles with a line explaining them, some of which were originally Marduk's, and some of which have been taken from other deities. This strongly echoes the naming section of Anzu, in which Ninurta is given the names of all the gods who have been assimilated with him. So now we understand the how of it, but exactly why was this done? To understand that, we need to look at the political atmosphere in which the poem was written. While there is some debate regarding the dating of the text, recent scholarship argues that it was written during the Kassite period, around 1595 to 1155 BCE, a time when the city of Babylon had risen to power from a relatively humble state. In Mesopotamia, the fortunes of a city were inextricably intertwined with the power of its patron deity, and victory of one city over another was often conceptualized as the victory of one god over another. As Marduk rose to power and prominence in the mythological realm, Babylon enjoyed a corresponding increase in power and prestige in the physical realm. The elevation of Marduk above Ninurta and Enlil can be seen in places other than the Enuma Elish. As discussed by George in 1997, temples in Babylon dedicated to Ninurta and Enlil house statues of Marduk, and not just as a visitor, but as the main occupant of the shrines, effectively appropriating the cults of the older gods by taking over their physical as well as mythological space. This ideological explanation and justification for the rule of one city over another meant that when Babylon's powers waned, Enuma Elish was itself appropriated by the Assyrians during the reign of Sennacherib in the 7th century BCE. Rather than use it as the basis for their own national myth, however, the Assyrians took the poem and replaced Marduk as the hero of the piece with Asur, their national god. In fact, the reviser goes so far as to replace Anshar, one of the primordial deities in Enuma Elish, with Asur. The Assyrian god has not only replaced Marduk, but is shown to be superior to him as he is now at the head of the divine genealogy. Thus, Ninurta's deeds became Marduk's deeds became Asur's deeds, as one city fell and another rose. The Assyrians also wove fragments of the myth, themes and motifs through their royal inscriptions, casting themselves as heroic figures holding back the forces of chaos. Enuma Elish is an amazing poem that takes pre-existing stories and themes and reworks them to create a national myth for a newly powerful city-state. It was so effective that it was itself reused by Assyria and provided a template for the Assyrian kings to hold back the forces of chaos. It doesn't disguise its reuse of other materials, but lets them shine through. Marduk's deeds, after all, are far less impressive if one isn't aware that he's meeting and surpassing the standard previously set by another god. If you've enjoyed this video series and would like to do some research yourself, a selected bibliography can be found in the description section. Digital Hammurabi's videos are made possible by the generous support of our patrons. If you enjoy what we do, please consider getting involved. More information can be found at www.patreon.com/Digital Hammurabi. Until next time, resist poor scholarship. Always ask, how do you know that?